all. A very good evening to all. The theme of this session is disaster communication and mass media, and we have our guest speakers of the day, eminent experts from the area of disaster communication as well as mass media. As we all know, this is an area which is touching all our lives, and media brings the latest news to us about disaster, what is to be done in a disaster, maybe connecting all of us, and of course, reducing the losses of life and property that is caused not only by natural hazards, which is a compelling objective, of course, now for the combination of disaster management as well as how mass media can contribute to this. And it is now increasingly believed that the knowledge and technology base potentially applicable to the mitigation of natural disasters has grown so dramatically that it would be possible through a concerted, cooperative, maybe international effort to save many, many lives and reduce the human suffering, the dislocation and economic losses simply by providing better information, communication and awareness. We all understand, I think, that timely mass media communication about impending disasters can lead to appropriate individual and community action, which is the key to implementing effective prevention strategies, including evacuation and survival of people. Such communications, when they are made, they can educate, they can warn, inform, and empower people to take practical steps to protect themselves from natural hazards. What we are witnessing in Bangalore currently, it could have been avoided. It is being argued that this is definitely man-made, and the media is bringing all the information to us. There was recent earthquakes in various parts of the world, cyclones. We got first-hand information of that. So there is definitely a synergy that is there between mass media, mass communications, as well as the management of disasters. We have three eminent experts with us today who will be speaking on the subject. At the outset, I'd like to invite Professor Jayashree Jethwani to please open this debate, this discussion. Briefly about ma'am. Professor Jethwani did her doctorate from the School of International Studies, JNU, in media and elections, which included extensive fieldwork in India, Germany, and USA. She did her master's in political science from the Hindu College, Delhi University, PGD in advertising and public relations, and PGD in journalism from RP Institute of Mass Communication, New Delhi. She went to New South Wales for her fellowship in PR. After a long stint at the Indian Institute of Mass Communication spanning over 25 years as professor and program under 2016, until 2016 when she demitted office, she joined the Institute for Studies in Industrial Development, ISID, a public-funded national-level policy think tank working on media policy issues. Currently, she is a senior ICSSR research fellow based at ISID. The area of ma'am's present research is on wages and related issues in the news media industry in India. Professor Jethwani has been a lead communication expert for many international consultancies taken on behalf of UNESCO, UNICEF, UN, FPA, World Health Organization, USAID, among others. She's also on the board of studies of several central and state universities. In her long career, she has designed and anchored more than 150 training programs of various durations in the areas of corporate communication, advertising, social marketing, disaster communication, corporate social responsibility, and many others. She has been a visiting faculty to many coveted organizations, including the National Judicial Academy, Bhopal, and the LBS National Academy of Administration, Mussoorie. Also at Ordnance Staff College, Nagpur, Power Management Institutions, etc. Among the many books ma'am has authored and co-authored, some of which include When India Votes, Social Sector Communication, Corporate Communication, Public Relations Management, Advertising Management. She has contributed to the Sage Encyclopedia on Corporate Reputation in 2016 and has chapters in many books. Among the many awards that Professor Jethwani has received, some of which include the Exceptional Woman of Excellence by Women Economic Forum 2019, Sahyog Sahyadri Doordarshan Award on Leadership in Mass Communication Teaching 2014, Best Professor Award by World Education Congress 2013, and the Leadership Award in PR Academics from the PRSI 2010. So we know that we are an August company, and ma'am will be speaking about the topic and opening the discussion with us. Our two other discussants are Dr. Nivedita Haran, who of course we all know in the NAPSIPAC group, and briefly about ma'am. Ma'am graduated with economics and philosophy honors, obtained masters in philosophy from Jadavpur University and PhD in sociology from IIT Delhi. She joined the Indian Administrative Services in 1980 and worked in the state of Kerala and in Government of India in various departments that include departments of land revenue, disaster management, agriculture, industries, labor and employment, planning and home, apart from serving as district collector or magistrate. She was director and later joint secretary in Ministry of Urban Development, Government of India. She was also on deputation to the UN peacekeeping mission in Kosovo for 5 years. Post-retirement, ma'am has been engaged in activities related to research and academics in the areas of disaster resilience building, good governance, digitization of land records, labor and migration issues, and management of water, wastewater, and solid waste. She's a member of the court-appointed Committee of Experts for Cleaning Up and Conservation of the Dal Lake and the committee related to modernization of land records in Delhi. She's also the chairperson of the Center for Migration and Inclusive Development and Ente Bhumi Trust. She has been a regular speaker at various training institutes, including the Civil Services Training Academy at Missouri. Welcome, ma'am. Next, we have Lieutenant General VP Singh with us. Sir, in a military career spanning 4 decades, Lieutenant General VP Singh rose to the pinnacle of India's military hierarchy. Sir has served in some of the most conflict-prone regions of the world and has gained enormous experience in practicing the art of leadership. Military diplomatic exposure he has gained in Cambodia, UNTSC, China, and Australia that shaped his worldview and understanding of the changing global environment. In the later part of his career as the senior directing staff at the prestigious National Defense College, Sir mentored the highest people of civil, military, and diplomatic leaderships in India and 30 foreign nations in the fields of international relations, geopolitics, disaster management, and policy formulation. So with this lineup of experts, I'm sure today's session is going to be an absolutely thrilling one to learn from, to engage in. We welcome all kinds of questions at the end of the session. And without further ado, over to Professor Jethwani for a brief overview, ma'am. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Yadav, for a very, very generous introduction. Media often brings contrasting perspectives of being the messiah to being the monster which recognizes no one, and devours the well-established reputations of people and institutions without any remorse, taking no accountability of the damage it may cause. The flip side is that journalists covering crime and disasters often have court cases haunting them for long. Professor K from Bangladesh referred media as an occupational hazard. Some call it unavoidable nuisance. I have a confession to make. When it was a boom time for media in the 1990s, hundreds of channels were coming up, and equivalent to that, we had hundreds of schools of journalism mushrooming. And teaching at one such school was seen as very savvy and glamorous. But looking at the way media is going today, for the last maybe 10 years or so, people often react with the, oh. So you can see the difference, 10 years ago, maybe 20 years ago and now, media has really come a long way and not necessarily for good reasons. There's a huge polarization in media. When I'm saying media, what I mean is news media. There are about more than 1 lakh newspapers and publications. There are 400 news channels which beam, news 24/7. And there are so many, news sites on the internet. The YouTube uploads more than 3,000 hours of video every hour. So imagine the kind of information overload we have. There was a time when media was seen as a gatekeeper, a conduit between the governed and the people who are governing and the governed. But with the coming of the digital media, we have seen that the very definition of media has changed. The expectations of media are too many in its watchdog function in questioning the powers that be on myriad issues on the one hand, And the interest of the people, especially the marginalized ones, those on the fringes, were taking up the issues on the other hand. Media is also expected to contribute to the development process, ensuring good governance. But you've seen in the last quarter century or so, there has been a huge paradigm shift in media definition, as I said, access and reach. The bandwidth is expanded so much that most of the 7.6 billion people who inhabit this planet have access to one or the other kind of media, especially in case they have access to a smartphone, a computer, iPad, or internet connectivity. We have seen heroes becoming out of ordinary people, someone even making a dosa, someone in Kerala becomes the dosa dadi, the whole world knows about. Somebody becomes a secret superstar. So media has given that kind of democratic, space to the people, but easier said than done. We know the kind of surveillance, we know the kind of other issues which also come with this kind of, this kind of access. So we look at that, we look at India, people in India are big consumers of news. They are politically savvy. But when we look at the news channels, where I said 400 news channels out of more than 1,000 channels, if you look at the total access of news channels, it's not even 2 digits, less than 10%. But when there's a disaster, when there's a cricket match or something, you see that a huge surge in the viewership. We saw it during COVID. There was almost more than 200% rise in the access of news and the reach of news. And the digital media has seen a huge paradigm shift in how media is to be viewed and consumed. As I said some time back, that media was seen as a gatekeeper, but now anyone who has access to a smartphone can become a news disseminator, what we term as the user-generated content. And you find, especially in times of disasters, people who are right there, they just need a video, they just need a camera, which is inbuilt nowadays in the mobile phones. And you find that there's a huge difference sometimes from what you see the people uploading and what is the government's perspective and what is the mainstream media's perspective. A research which I conducted a few years ago gave me some very interesting insights. It said that the mainstream media, like newspapers and TV, which were supposed to be the gatekeepers and the givers of news first, they have become very dependent on the digital media, especially the social media. So in the morning, the journalists over a cup of tea, they don't look at the newspaper, which they might have written themselves, but they generally surf the channels, they surf the internet to see what is trending. So what is trending in the morning becomes the stories in the television and maybe eveningers or next day's newspapers. Now let me contextualize this need and scope for media and communication scholars, because I find there are more than 10 scholars, and when I say scholars, most of them are faculty members, including very senior people. Professor Amrish Saxena, I hope, is there. So if you look at media and communication, it was not seen as a social science for very long. The Indian Council of Social Science Research also did not allow any research studies in media for very long. But over the last 10 years or so, media has become, or at least seen as a part of applied social sciences. But media is also a tool, a practice, at the same time an institution, known as the fourth estate in democracy, with the function of a watchdog. Therefore, scholars who study disaster management at media schools will be able to report disasters based on a better understanding about disasters conceptually and the legal and ethical framework. And the communication studies, as we know, also integrate aspects of both social science and humanities. As social science, the discipline overlaps sociology, psychology, anthropology, economics, and public policy. So a course like this will, in my view, is very, very important for scholars of communication. In some of these journalism schools, we have about 300 universities teaching journalism and mass communication. If I'm not mistaken, if my memory serves me right, they do not have, none of them have any course on grief journalism or disaster communication. So this could be a great opportunity for people who are attending and maybe express further that we begin some course as a module or an independent course in disaster communication, but this is something which is going to go a long way. Now, coming back to media and disaster management, despite that they have symbiotic relationship, yet it probably is the most difficult, debated, and understood one. The trust levels between the two institutions, the governments, the authorities in charge of managing disasters, and the media often get to the lowest ebb in a disaster situation, especially on what and how the media need to cover the incident. Because there are two different ways of thinking. The way the government thinks and the way the media thinks is absolutely different. And also, media as a partner or a collaborator has not really been considered effectively in any disaster management policy or document. There's at best a reference about media for generating awareness. Most of the disaster action policies which I've studied, especially in vulnerable countries, they have not taken media on board, but seen it as a tool, a channel of communication, which in my view needs addressing. Now let us look at the Disaster Management Act 2005. The DMA has mentioned about media interestingly in section 67 and sagaciously also in section 54. Section 67 says, I quote, direction to media for communication of warning, etc. The national authority, the state authority or district authority may recommend to the government to give direction to any authority or person in control of any audiovisual media or such other means of communication as may be available to carry on any warning or advisories regarding any threatening disaster situation or disaster, and the said means of communicating media designated shall comply with such direction. Again, top-down instruction, not seen as an equal, but somebody who can be given instructions. Clause 54 defines the punishment for false warning as follows. Punishment for false warning, whoever makes or circulates a false alarm or warning as to disaster or severity or magnitude leading to panic shall on conviction be punishable with imprisonment, which may extend to 1 year or with fine. Although whoever has been left ambiguous, but it could be interpreted to include any person or any institution, including news media and social media platforms. We saw with utter consternation during the COVID-19. In the beginning, I recall the Prime Minister of India, when it was just erupting COVID-19, he had a online discussion, a meeting with about 15 odd top journalists and editors, telling them that there's a huge responsibility on all of us. We have to go together, and I would expect you to be very responsible in giving disseminating information. That went on very well. There were a lot of accolades about the Prime Minister talking to them. But as the things went from bad to worse, and you found that a lot of journalists were booked against so many acts for spreading false news. Some of them ended up in being jailed, and some of them still fighting their cases. So it's something, false news, misinformation, disinformation is often interpreted differently. What really happens in a disaster for the government, any authority, is very important not to create a panic, which is right. But then when there's too much of criticism, which they might feel is false or with some agenda, and they take it as a question of reputation management. So in disaster situation, you never get accolades, you never get bouquets. All this should be left at the end while the disaster is on. Who is saying what is not important than what you are doing to bring about succor and help to the people who are survivors, who are victims. So, but media also has a responsibility to report with high ethical and professional standards. A number of past instances, however, have amply reflected that when media reportage was insightful and inflammatory, it contributed to fuel conflict in a number of crisis situations. This is, I'm quoting from an international study by International Media Organization a few years ago. So we have a regulatory authority called Press Council of India, which has also set up some norms on reporting of natural calamities. Some of them are very general, but a couple of them I thought I'll share with you. One says facts and data relating to spread of epidemics or natural calamities shall be checked up thoroughly from authentic sources and then published with due restraint in a manner bereft of sensationalism, exaggeration, surmises, or unverified facts. Now, easier said than done. When you look at the sociology of the media, the tough competition which they have with each other, 400 newspapers, everybody keeps saying that we are number one. I'm sure you're watching on the television. As said, the total access is less than 10%, but each one says we are number one. So for that breaking news, for that, being one up and then the other, so they create sensationalism, all funny kinds of, headlines we see. There's a trial by media. So the reasons may not necessarily be to put down the government, but maybe to put down a adversary in media, but that's not fair at all. The other, guideline from PCI, the Press Council of India, is media should give wide publicity to do's and don'ts and the potential benefits of disaster mitigation so that the society follows them before, during, and after the occurrence of the disasters. People should be detailed on standard guidelines. The issues of children and women, which are the most vulnerable group during and after disasters, should be handled carefully by the media. Now, it's very important for the NDMA and all the authorities to, sensitize the journalists, not only sensitize, educate the journalists on the P's and Q's of disaster management. I recall at IMC when we were holding these programs for the Armed Forces of India for good almost 20 years. But we found that, after some time when the Kargil war happened, so we used to even train the GCOs and all on films and photography. So the Kargil war was totally covered internally by the armed forces. All those videos which you saw, the photography which you saw, they did not take anybody's, help from outside. And also Lieutenant General Singh would remember that they, in their College of Combat at Maho, they started inviting journalists for workshops on armed forces, on disaster, on terrorism, on insurgency, so that they understood that better before they reported. I'm sure NDM is doing it. They're not doing it. It's very important to keep the journalists in loop. Then the third guideline which they say is it's necessary to have complete cooperation between the media and all government and non-governmental agencies to the extent of coordination cooperation between them, which determines the nature, the degree, and the scale of preparedness to prevent or meet the disasters. So it's very important not to take media just as a tool or as a channel. I firmly believe that they should be taken as partners, because media is as responsible, the CSO, the civil society organizations, the NGOs are as responsible. Yesterday, to a question of mine, Mr. Voss, Dr. Voss said, I said, how much is contributed in terms of, help and, succor in terms of money by the NGO CSOs? He said almost between 10 to 20%, which runs into thousands of crores. So it is not just the business of or the responsibility of the government or the disaster authority, but everybody. But how do we enthuse them? How do we take them on board is very important. Unfortunately, India is very vulnerable to disasters, but I really haven't seen, at least at the national level, any remarkable, or by remarkable, I haven't seen any campaigns on preparing the communities for the impending disasters. When a disaster comes, obviously, then we are only responding, responding to the situation. But I haven't seen any campaign to say, how do you keep yourself ready for a disaster? Tomorrow, God forbid, an earthquake happens. So are we not supposed to be ready, and what do we do? And I recall a few years ago when we had a fire in a 5-star hotel, which had almost 100% occupancy. The occupancy of the foreigners was 80%, about 20% were Indians. And most of the casualties and the people injured were among the Indians and not even one among the foreigners. Why? Because they have learned how to handle a fire. I recall watching on a news clip at that time, a foreigner who came back unscathed the fire said, how did you manage yourself? You were on so and so floor. He said the least one can find in a room are lots of towels. He said, I just soaked them in water, covered myself, and just ran down the staircase. So small little things. I remember I was a little girl when, 1965, the Chinese aggression was happening. And in a schools, trenches were made so that in case there was some problem, the students, the children can go down in the trenches. And we were also given cotton, which we could put it in our in our ears so that our ears would not burst. So that kind of preparedness to now we are facing so many disasters. I haven't seen any campaign worth the while, which is very unfortunate but true. Then you also find guidelines for United Nations Office on Disaster Risk and Reduction, UNDRR. I will not get into that because of time constraint. For those of you who are interested, especially the faculty, it's in the public domain. You find there are huge number of guidelines for editors, newsroom, reporters. There are a number of pages of the questions which the journalists should have when they go and cover a disaster. So you find sometimes very funny questions being asked when a novice or somebody who's not trained into disaster coverage goes and asks, how are you feeling? Now, how would one feel when one has lost somebody or is in the midst of a disaster? So I would recommend all of you to go to UNDRR's site and download it for you. So I'm not sharing with that. Now, in the end, I would just tell you the gaps from the supply and demand side of information examination. When I say supply side, which means the side of the authorities, the government which supplies information, and the demand side, the demand of the independent media. So what media broadly needs to address from their side, develop disaster as a specialized beat and not as a coverage of any event happening that needs reporting from ground zero. Unfortunately, media is criticized for treating everything like an event. If you recall, when we still have the Russia-Ukraine war, the breaking news went on for a month, 24/7. Now you don't even hear even 1 minute of news on the war. It's still on. But then while they're covering a disaster or a breaking news, another breaking news comes, they completely forget the first breaking news, which might still be on. Disaster reporters need to have an avid understanding of the disaster laws, policies, mandate, economics. This will help them questioning the authorities. They must look at the annual plan prepared by NDMA, SDMAs, various surveys and plans. If they don't do it, what kind of questions are going to ask? They need to have working knowledge of the legal framework surrounding environment, ecology, human rights, fundamental rights. Media need to develop their web measurement index to find what the websites of disaster authorities include or the vital information that citizens need to know. They must raise questions and sensitize the public at large. Once a disaster occurs, media need to insist on briefing twice a day to know the update on relief and rehabilitation government plans. I recall in 1982, ONGC had the first offshore fire in Mumbai, and Colonel Wahi was heading ONGC at that time. He created a war zone, a war kind of a home in Mumbai because their head office was in Dehradun. The political mill was in Delhi, but the disaster happened in Mumbai. And that was not the time even for digital media or the internet, but they would keep registers to see which journalist came what time, what press release was he given. He would address the media twice a day at a particular place. So the spokesperson was available almost 24/7. And now with the ease of disseminating information, sharing information, you can create a virtual newsroom on your websites to cater to the needs of the media. And to see whether the disaster information toolkit includes decision-making time frame, what technology and channels were used to disseminate information in various phases of disaster, what are the relief measures, deployment of various teams from SDMAs, Coast Guards, etc. This is for the journalists who are covering disasters. Now, let us look at what the authorities need to address from the supply side. Now, we all know that the primary responsibility of disaster management rests with the central and state governments where a disaster struck, NDM and all parts of that. Keep the channels of communication transparent, quick, clear, and precise. Put information on website immediately and keep updating it timely. Decide on the spokesperson for media. It should not be musical chairs. You sometimes find different kinds of spokespersons coming. No, it should not be done. One or two, depending on the gravity of the situation, decide on the spokesperson. Announce press briefing times at least twice daily. Repeat messages many times, especially in regard to relief measures, because reason generally takes a backseat. People ought to be told again and again through various channels, mainstream media. You would have seen in the last 20, 25 years, media itself has become like an institution of reaching out to communities. I recall when the Bombay floods, the Srinagar floods, there'll be a scroller going on in the news items, people trying to reach out to their parents or the children, they saying I'm safe and all. So what the government was supposed to do, the media was doing it for connecting the families during the disaster. Set up emergency contact lines for media and general public. Disseminate urgently the plan of action on evaluation and rehabilitation and relief. Aim at building trust levels among all stakeholders, especially media and affected communities. As I told you in the beginning, that it becomes the trust levels go to the worst ebb, so it's very important that we forget about who is what. We all have a joint venture to look at the disaster per se as the common enemy. Close vigil on social media, fake news, grapevine, misinformation, disinformation is also very important during disasters. So in a nutshell, one has to take on board, despite the negative opinions about media, some of which may be true, take the media on board. There can be no connect with the masses in general without making use of media channels. You've seen that there's a huge polarization of media on political lines, other lines, setting of agenda. But now people have become very smart. They understand the real from the fake. You would have seen during the farmers' agitation or other, when we had dharnas and all, you find some people not allowing some media houses to come near them, the reporters, because in their perception, they did not do a right job or they did a right job. So we should not take the public opinion non-seriously, because that is what really makes or mars things as they go. So in the end, I would say the principle of TEA to be followed by both authorities and media: transparency, efficiency, accountability, how early you can reach out with the people. Don't brush things under the carpet. Trial by media, whatever happens, this can be taken care of later. When it's a question of life and property, it's very important that we all work in tandem. So I'll just give a quick run on the most suitable media in disaster risk reduction. Mainstream media for wider discourse and reach. Mobile phones for targeted intervention. Apps for connecting communities on myriad issues. Community radio for generating information and dissemination among grassroots communities. Traditional folk media or face-to-face communication among smaller groups. Pamphlets, flyers, wall paintings, community newspapers, meetings at the RWAs could be at the interpersonal level. So with this, I will rest my discourse. I have some possible areas of research in media and communication, but I'll speak about them in case there's a question at the end of the discourse. Thank you so much. I hope I've made some sense. I pass it on to you, Dr. Yadav.
Thank you so much, Professor Jetwani. I think this was completely eye-opening. And you're absolutely right when you say that the study of mass media has to include the study of disaster management also, because the reporting, when it is done in mass media, through mass media, definitely requires in-depth study of how to mitigate disasters and manage disasters so that the reporting can be humane. You gave examples to show that. Thank you so much, ma'am. And like ma'am said, if there are any questions, please write to us in the chat box, which we can take up later at the end of the session after the three eminent speakers have spoken. I would now like to request Dr. Nivedita Haran to please share her expertise, especially on how the state governments make use of communication and interface with mass media for reaching out to various constituencies and people at large. And ma'am, if there are any SOPs which are to be followed and the need for synergy. Over to you, ma'am, to throw some light. We're also joined by Professor Amita Singh. Welcome, ma'am.
Welcome, Amita.
Hello, Amita. Good to see you. It's a pleasure talking to you all today. And I think Dr. Jayashree, Professor Jayashree has given a very overarching overview of the role of the media. what I shall try to do is take a peek at the media more from the position that I had held in the government, and perhaps give a few examples, few illustrations if time permits, and also maybe come up with a few suggestions that could be apt for the media. Now, next slide, please. As you're aware that disaster management has a lot of importance these days. It's important not because it's something new, but it's important because it impinges all our lives. Everyone is affected by disasters. Whether it's a disaster which is a major natural disaster, which happens once in a while, like an earthquake or a landslide. We have seen how the urban floods can bring the life of an entire city to a standstill. So it's all pervasive. It's all pervasive. It's there affecting the lives of all. So not only has the frequency of disasters increased for the reason that there is more habitation, the population has gone up, there is more land area occupied, many water bodies are being occupied due to shortage of land and due to many other reasons. So the frequency has gone up. There is no gainsaying that. But what is also important to note is that the intensity has also increased. Who would have thought that there would be 80 millimeters of rainfall in Bangalore city in the course of 36 hours? It has happened. In Kerala in 2018, when we had the massive floods, within the course of, I think if I remember right, 2 days, we had the rainfall of an entire year, which was about 2,000 millimeters. So you can imagine when this kind of a rainfall rainfall happens, it becomes a disaster because nobody is prepared for it. Now, whether it is due to climate change or not, this is not the right forum, but that's the thought that I leave you with. It's also important to note that the disasters that happen are not something that just come and go. They impact us in many, many ways. They impact very simply the lives of the common people, the lives of everyone, whether it's a person living in a high rise or a person living or a fisherman living on the coastal land of Kerala. It impacts most people's lives. Now, this leads to a lot of losses of lives, loss of property, and loss or damage to infrastructure. There was a World Bank study about, I think 5 years back, that said that over the last 10 years, the whole world has lost about $1.3 trillion worth of from the general wealth of the world due to disasters. So it could be due to damage to infrastructure, damage to personal property, lives lost. Of course, lives cannot be put a value to, but then they did a valuation of that, and this was the figure that they came up with. Over the last 10 years, over 1.1 million deaths have occurred due to disasters. And these disasters were major, minor, etc. And very important, and I repeat this, I say it very often, more than 20 million families have gone below the poverty line because of disasters. Now, natural disasters and man-made disasters are not limited to India alone. They happen in every country. It happened in Europe this summer. All of you would have read how even in southern UK, there were there were deaths due to absence of drinking water. Now, who would have thought that could happen? Now, in India, we have the Act. Professor Jethwani mentioned about the Act. I'm not going into the Act, but what is the structure that exists in the government for the media to be able to access information and share information? So at the district level, we have the District Disaster Management Authority, which is headed by the district collector or the district magistrate, with the ADM as the convener, which has members from the health department, education department, agriculture, principal agriculture officer, the disaster management for the deputy collector who handles disaster management. And we also have what we call the district information officer. You see, in most states now, I think Professor Jayashree will know better. I think in every state now, all districts have what is called the district information officer. They're variously named. Some are called district information officer. In some places, they are district protocol officers. In some places, district, I think there's some other name to it, media officers. So, but they are there. So in Kerala, I'm talking about Kerala here because that's the state that I'm most familiar with. We have the DDMA, which has the DIO or the DPO as a special invitee. Now, at the state level, there is what is called the State Disaster Management Authority, which is headed by the Chief Minister in every state. This is as per the Act, Disaster Management Act of 2005, with the Chief Secretary, the Minister Home, the Minister Health, the Additional Chief Secretary Disaster Management, the ACS Home, and here again, what is in the state level information officer is a special invitee. Why it is so, I will come to that presently when I come to the role of the media officers in the government. Similarly, there is the State Executive Committee, which is set up under Section 20 of the Act. And I was heading these committees, some of them. These are set up when there is a special disaster to be handled. So there was a chemical disaster in Kerala at that time when I was ACS Revenue. And there was a State Executive Committee. And I remember that we specially invited the state protocol officer, who is also the information officer, for the simple reason that the public was extremely agitated about what was happening. And he needed to convey to the public that there was something happening and we hope to get somewhere at the end of it. In addition to this, many of the municipal corporations have media officers. They are government officials, and in Kerala, some of the local body level, the Panchayat and ULB level organizations also have media officers. The next slide, please. Now, what is the role of the media? When I talk of the media, I think Professor Jayashree was talking about the media, which is basically the independent media, as we call it. But when I talk about the media here, I also include what I call who are called the information officer, the media officer, the protocol officer, the public relations officer. These are all positions in the state and at the district level. And all of them in some way or the other are dealing with giving out information, receiving information, and being the eyes and ears of the government. Then there are the state-sponsored media, there are audio channels, there are video channels on that, the state-sponsored media, and then there are the independent media, which are totally independent of the government, but they also need information from the government. So what is the role of the media as I see it, the duties and the responsibilities? And I am now focusing on the first one, the information officer, who are part of the government. Their responsibility begins with disseminating information. They have to ensure that the correct information, whether it is at the end of a cabinet meeting or when a disaster has happened and the public needs to be informed, the media, the private media needs to be informed about what the government is doing. The information has to be given out. It has to be reliable. It has to be right from the horse's mouth. And this is the duty that the public relations officer performs in every state. Then there is informing. informing the public, informing the media, informing all stakeholders that something is to happen or something could happen if the government gets that information. I remember during our post-tsunami, we have now a system by which any earthquakes or any movement in the tectonic plates in the Indian Ocean is immediately caught in the seismographs that are located in India. And the information would come to us, and I would then ask the the state information officer to give a press release or go out and inform the media that this kind of an earthquake has happened, this kind of a movement has happened, there is chance of high sea waves, and therefore the fishermen should take care. So this is informing the public. They also have the role of generating awareness and building capacity. This is a role that they perform more during the non-disaster period. You see, we always mention that that disaster has the two sides to it. There is the side to it which covers when post-disaster, when a disaster has happened. So then it's a war-like situation. You move to find out who needs what, relief, immediate assistance that is required. But there is also the pre-disaster time. It is that time, it is that period which is also important for the media to generate awareness, to build capacity, and to make the people aware as to what could be dangerous for them. The kind of thing that Dr. Jayashree was mentioning, awareness about what should be our behavior when an earthquake happens. Should we be going down the stairs? No. Should we be jumping off the balcony? No. There are ways to deal with it. We have to find the safest wall in the room and sit against it, or find a safe furniture or a table and sit under it. These are lessons that are taught in our schools. We teach them in the schools. So these are awareness building and capacity building activities that the information officer is also involved in from the government side. Of course, they are also involved, and that's a very thankless job when a disaster happens, a lot of VIP visits, and as secretary or as collector, we would always tell the information officer, you handle it. I'm not going into it because I have too many other things to handle. And therefore, that would also be his or her responsibility. There is another important thing that the media officers do. And I remember in Kerala, we had a program which was funded by the UNDP, and we started the work. Unfortunately, I don't think it's been done all over the country. Our aim was to get it done all over the country, which is collating and creating a repository of all past data. You see, we learn from the past. And when a disaster happens, of course, it's simple to, search the Google and find out. But there are a lot of things that are missing from Google information or from the Wikipedia. And that is what is covered when you make a repository of all past data. And in Kerala, we started the exercise, but unfortunately, I think it was left halfway. And I'm not sure whether it's been completed. But that is something that, as a media person, that is to be done. I know that some of the independent media maintain a very good historical data of past disasters. And we used to access that in Kerala. I know, for instance, that some of the newspapers, the media in Kerala have excellent past historical data, and we would take recourse to it. And finally, one of the duties of the information officer who is representing the media within the government is also to issue press statements, press briefings, arrange press conferences, etc. Next, please. The roles are changing. Roles are changing for various reasons. It happens all the time, but more so in the 21st century. The independent media, as was mentioned, they are large in number. There are many. In fact, there are so many that at times one wonders whether one needs that many. But then we are a free society, and anyone is free to set up a channel he or she wants. But there are a lot of them, and some of them are extremely alert, extremely aware, and they act with alacrity, which is a hallmark of disaster management. You have to respond quickly. You can't write it on file and keep it away for next day, because this is something that requires immediate response. And the state media is learning from it. I feel happy when I see, when I now talk to some of the persons handling the media within the government, and they tell me that, and I used to always say that you need to not only learn from the independent media, you need to be one step ahead of them. And when some of them tell me that, Madam, we have picked this up from them and we are following it, I feel very happy and enthused about it. These days, not only is limited to the audio-visual media, it has, of course, brought the world closer, because every person can now share information. He or she can share information through YouTube, through WhatsApp, through many other sources. And as was mentioned by Jayashree, everyone has become a media person now. So we are living in times where information is very, very easily available and accessible. Therefore, the role of the information officer in the district or in the state becomes even more important. He or she has to make sure that there is a good coordination between the different departments. There is no contradictory information going out. There is nothing going out that is contradicting the policies of the government. You see, one has to also keep that in mind. He has to keep that in mind, that he is not contradicting what the government policies are, because that would be disastrous. That could lead to a lot of gaffes in the future. Then there is the social media. The social media has taken over everything, taken over our lives. And it requires that one is up to date all the time, not just wake up in the morning and check what has happened over the world, but every hour. And that every hour becomes every half an hour. I really wonder how people keep up to it sometimes. Then there is government presence on Facebook, on Instagram, on Twitter, and these are the quickest modes of disseminating information, and the government has to use it. I remember even 10, 15 years back, some of the states had said that they would not use these methods. They are fine with the press briefings and press releases, etc. But they have now given up. Every government, every state government has a website. They are on Facebook, they are on IG. And therefore, social media is something that is here to stay, at least for some time. And therefore, we cannot shut our eyes to it. It is necessary that the media, wherever you are, whether you are in the government or in the private media, you need to have accurate knowledge. You need to have accurate knowledge, more so for disaster management, because disaster management is something that has a wrong knowledge spread can have very serious repercussions. It's also the duty of the information officer now within the government to identify misreporting. And there are very hilarious stories on that, which I recall, and to take action to correct those mistakes. Because you see, it's not enough to have something being reported and just lie there. We have to make sure that we point out the mistake, and we make sure that if it's possible and if it is necessary, to withdraw the mistake. And finally, as I said earlier, need for historical data, because that is one of the ways in which we can learn. Next slide, Vinod. If time permits, I want to give a few real-life illustrations, and that would probably set you thinking and probably also be case studies for you. Maybe I'll stop at one or two if time is short. So the first case study is a very peculiar one. It concerns a dam called Mullaperiyar Dam, which is located on the boundary of Kerala, Tamil Nadu, and Karnataka. It's located on Kerala land. but very close to the boundary of Tamil Nadu and Karnataka. It's a dam which is providing irrigation facilities only to Tamil Nadu. It serves no purpose for Kerala. It was built by the British at a time when the entire area was one Malabar state. And therefore, since the bifurcation has happened, it so happened that the Mullaperiyar Dam has fallen on the Kerala side, although it is servicing Tamil Nadu. Now, in the year 2012, when I was Relief Commissioner and handling disaster management, there was a big scare that there are cracks in the dam. The dam is about 100 years old. It was constructed, if I'm not mistaken, in 1910. So it's more than 100 years old. And there are cracks in the dam. So we did everything possible from the administrative side. We went to court, we filed cases, we went to the Central Water Commission, etc., etc. But what I want to mention here is that there was the fear, and this information was being spread through some of the media. In fact, it was the research work done by one of the professors handling disaster management in Mahatma Gandhi University, that if it was a pictorial depiction that if the dam cracked or broke, what would happen to Kerala? And the situation was obviously very, very serious. Entire Kottayam city would be wiped out. Half of Cochin, Ernakulam would be wiped out. All the villages and panchayats on the way would be taken away with the water, and such very extremely, fear-mongering information. Now, in our country, it's not easy to withdraw something. And I called the professor, I asked him how to go about it, because it's creating a lot of problems. And he should not have done that without bringing it first to our notice. And he said that he had done it for the safety and security of the people living there. He was taking a stand that he has done it in public interest. Now, it was my information officer, the state protocol officer, who gave me a very good idea. He said that, madam, what we should do is that we should bring out a similar thing, saying that this is the depiction that is given by this gentleman. He's a professor, and he has done it as a part of his study when there was no crack in the dam, there was no such idea floating around. But he has done that as a part of his research study. And a research study is a research study unless it is tested out. And so we did that. And we sent out the information throughout Ernakulam city, Kottayam city, Todupura, all the areas which the dam water would have covered, would have inundated, that this is only a study. So don't believe in it and don't get scared by it. And I remember and I give full credit to the information officer who was with me. He was the one who was actually going from house to house, explaining to people that don't believe it. This is not what is going to happen. If the dam breaks, we have made arrangements for you to take shelter at a higher level. We have got community shelters at a level. We have put alarms in the dam. So the moment the water level goes to this height, there'll be an alarm, and therefore you will be alerted. So you see, this kind of a work, we were able to avert the situation. What happened at the end of it? The dam did not break, but that's another story. The second case I want to mention is another one which involved very sensitive handling. There is a temple in Trivandrum city, and this happened when I was Collector Trivandrum. And they have something called the Atukal Pongala. They have once a year festival there where all the women sit on the roadside and cook some kind of a porridge or a khichdi and offer to the god, to the Devi, who's in the Atukal Devi Kshetram. Now, it was a practice, and it's also identified as the Shabarimala for women. So there's a lot of, emotional attachment the women have to it. Now, when this season came and the festival was to be held, the women, book their places along the pavements, and they sit And I believe that it's in the Guinness Book of World Records that it's the longest row of women who sit for this festival. Now, one thing I found when I went to inspect the site was that there were a couple of fuel stations, gas stations that had come up over the last 2 years, and the women were actually crossing that area. So when I asked the managers of those places that they will be lighting a fire there because they make a small angiti with bricks and then they light a fire. So when I asked him that, isn't that dangerous? And he said, yes. So I said, how is it that you're allowing it? Why have you not complained to anyone? He said that they will not listen to anyone. Now, I understood that this was happening, and even before my arrival, even though the fuel stations had been there for 2-3 years, this had been going on. But it was dangerous because if a fire happened and there was an explosion in a gas station, there would be a lot of lives lost. So again, I had a very good information officer with me. And what we did was, there was a lot of negative media. There was a lot of information being spread that even though the collector is a woman, she's preventing the women from doing the worshipping. This man, my information officer, actually brought out such brilliant little pamphlets, one-pagers, which we distributed to the women, where we explained that it's for your safety, it is for your benefit. You don't want to be your children motherless by having an explosion here. And what we also did, which was very simply done by consulting the Commissioner of Police, we just diverted the seating area of the women in such a way that they did not cross these fuel stations. So you see, it can be done. And this is where the media and the media officers in the government have to be sensitive. They have to be able to handle it in a manner that that is for the benefit for the people, because at the end of the day, most important is the life of the people. We cannot compromise. The next slide, please. The last slide. I leave you with some suggestions. This is the age of data, information, knowledge, but it is also the age of data and information that can be fake. And therefore, you have to be careful. Everyone has to be careful. There is a lot of tendency to, see something, create something out of nothing, and then spread it to others. It's human nature. It happens. But one has to be, as a media person, you have to be careful that you judge what is correct and what is not. What is robust, what is accurate, what is to be given out to the people. You have to take a call, keeping in mind that the safety of the people are foremost. Safety and security of human life is paramount. There's no gainsaying that. There can be no compromise. Use of cogent and clear language, that is important. I have sometimes when I watch the news over the media, I find that the information can be very misleading, can be very not so correct, and that should be avoided. We have to be clear. We have to be, especially when you are conveying an information regarding a disaster, you cannot mislead, and you have to be upfront. You always have to be always have to make sure that you have a reliable sounding board. That helps. And I have seen in my life that when I have an idea and I test it out on someone who I trust as knowing the subject, as a sounding board, I think my idea really gets polished and more, it becomes a better idea than it's started with. And I think in the media also that needs to be done, rather than run with something and put it just for a breaking news. The social media can be very tricky, and you have to be careful and you have to be up to date, because that's the norm. The role in awareness building that media plays, not only in the government now, I'm talking about every media, the private media, the government-run media, everyone. Whether it is chemical disasters, nuclear disasters, pandemic, a lot of important role is played by the media. And therefore, it is important that the media has good, accurate, robust knowledge. They engage with experts, learn from experts, and you have to make sure that you keep your supervisory officers aware as to what you are going to bring out. The media also plays a role in bridging the gap between scientists, technocrats on the one hand, and administrators on the other. I have a few examples in mind, and they can play a very important role in that. Similarly, between the defense forces, the NDRF, and the victims, the media plays a very important role. And finally, you have to make the data and information on disasters a part of our cultural ethos. What Dr. Jayashree said, that one should know how to react when a disaster happens. It should become our reflex. I think that kind of response is needed from our children, from our youth, and from each of us. And therefore, this should start from school. It should start from the youngest age. So a child knows how to respond. If he sees somebody drowning, how does he respond? If there is an earthquake, how does he respond? So I think this should become a part of our cultural ethos. And as days are passing, we see how anthropogenic disasters, such as traffic accidents, urban floods, are becoming the norm. And therefore, the media has to make sure that they study that, they understand it before they come up with something. They have to use innovative methods. I think I'll stop here. I have, I think, taken a lot of time. I expect if questions are raised, I'll be able to tackle them. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Nivedita Haran. I think this was absolutely informative, especially how you went from the administrative structure, ma'am, the disaster management administrative structure, to the case studies where you were able to preempt some of the possible disasters. And I think there the role of communication, mass communication, is extremely important. Thank you so much, ma'am. We'll definitely see if we have any questions and take them up later. I would now like to move on with our next speaker, eminent speaker, Lieutenant General VP Singh, sir. And sir will present his discourse delineating the scope of communication from ground, challenges in communication in disastrous situations, and dealing with journalists at disaster sites, and what are the lessons learned from sir's life experiences, professional experience. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. Yeah. Can you see my this presentation script on that?
We need to have it up.
You just have to share your screen. Just click on share screen and open your presentation.
Oh, I did that. I thought in the beginning.
Yeah,
no?
Yeah, but we had opened Nivedita ma'am's presentation, so that's why.
Okay, just a second.
Yeah, yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Is it okay now?
Yeah.
Yes, sir. Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much. So I am aware that I'm the last speaker and I have an advantage and a disadvantage. Advantage is that all that I wanted to say has already been said. So I have nothing to add. And disadvantage is that even if nobody hears me, I can get away with blue murder that I've said everything I wanted to. Having said that, I'll be once again presenting you from the practitioner's point of view. Even before, when I joined the army, perhaps I had no idea there is NDMA going to be there, or there is a disaster management manual and other thing. And on the very first, perhaps month when I was posted in Kashmir, there was a landslide and my platoon, which is just about 35 men, the villagers came, woke us up, and we went down and started rescuing people and all that. So even before I knew what disaster is, I was already dealing with it. And all through all these 40 odd years, number of times we got involved in disaster management. So from that point of view, I shall be putting across to you the, I would say, recipient's end. How do they feel and what it takes to let people know what has happened and how it can be helped. Now, the problem there used to be that, especially the field that I was in, the areas were absolutely remote, far off places, where even the basic facilities, amenities were not available those days. And dealing with disaster under those conditions was really a big challenge. So in today's this part of my presentation, I would lay little importance by way of a very basic presentation about how do we transmit the bad news, how do we transmit the necessities, what do we need, and other things to those who are managing our affairs. That is the imperatives of information dissemination. In disaster situation, as we all know, it's absolutely important that whatever we are telling the authorities, whatever we are telling the people who are victims, and whatever we are telling to the general public at large, the information is absolutely accurate. It is timely, and of course, there is no break in that information. Reason is that there is a lot of concern, there is a lot of, I would say, nervousness back as the chain goes back, that what is happening over there. But once the information start trickling down, people become little comfortable. They know what to do, what to send, and those kind of things. So it's extremely important that whatever we are communicating about the disaster, it is accurate. And of course, I have just said timely and other things. Now, this becomes very important because there are lives at stake. People are going to be there are going to be a lot of casualties and other things. So once you give the true picture to the people sitting at the back, then you know what to expect from them. If it is an exaggerated information passage, then what will happen? The relief which is going to come, or the store and other things which are going to pour in, it will be very difficult for you to manage. So this becomes the prerequisite for any information dissemination in disaster situation. Now, one or two first point I've already covered. It's a very critical component of successful disaster management. Now, what we need to have is a absolutely effective, fail-safe, and multi-layered communication in those situations. Because most of the time, the basic layout of or infrastructure will get compromised. And therefore, reliance only on one way of communicating the information may not work. So you have to have communication channels which are layered, so that if one fails, the other one is working. And in your own, like when the preparations are there, or when the developmental works and other things are taking place, you make sure that you have a very fail-safe mechanism in place to deal with the disaster and information dissemination. Now, comprehensive coverage of information is extremely important. Pre, during, and post-disaster management plan, what happens is when the disaster strikes, you have a lot of information going to and fro. However, a state or a region or a district or any other place is best placed if during the preparatory stages or in the normal time when there is no disaster, we have kind of practices, we have drills, we have mock drills which you carry out to ensure that should something happen here, how will we deal with it? During disaster, it's very normal that all kind of channels will be open, a lot of information will go to and fro. It is equally important in the post-disaster management, because now the restoration phase takes over. And it is very important for you to ensure that restoration is also taking place, or rehabilitation, etc., is also taking place in an orderly manner. To ensure there is not wastage of resources, to also ensure that whatever is being passed on to the people is actually what they need. Now, the advantage, when I say misadvantage, is most of the places where disasters, when they strike, the locals are generally aware. If it is a earthquake prone area, perhaps they or their grandfathers or fathers, or the people who have been there, they would have been through that disaster sometime or the other in 40, 50, 100 years. So there is some sort of a passage of information already available. People are aware that these kind of things take place. People living close to the river banks, they are aware that there will be flood. So there are natural and I would say traditional inbuilt mechanism in all those places. We have seen it on ground to protect themselves. However, with the advent of technology and other thing, this, like I've seen, when it starts raining, people downstream, they are generally aware. By the time the civil administration, other people reach there, they are generally aware. The problem is that they are very, very reluctant to leave their places. Now, administration and information comes in play here to actually tell them very, very effectively that it's time for you to leave and make those arrangements so that they can leave. It's very difficult for a villager to leave all his livestock here, there, and everything and walk away from there. So those are the critical aspects which become very important when we pass on these information and prepare those people to meet those disasters. Of course, it will be built in the disaster management plan. Another important aspect is a feedback mechanism and archival storage, I would say. Now, what happens is many people have come and gone, faced the disasters, helped the people over there, created a lot of information material, but then sadly, it all just gets buried in. Couple of decades later, when disaster takes place, suddenly you'll find, oh, this has happened about 10 years back. People have suffered like this, and yet we are just repeating the same cycle. So it's very important in our system of information dissemination, and wherever these our government mechanism is there, to ensure there is a feedback mechanism and there is a kind of a record, so that people are educated and they are aware what to do should something happen like that. Coming to the next one, the instruments like media, lot has been said. I feel it is, of course, a very, very potent, but just one component of dissemination of information. There are the most critical component is people who leave these disaster areas, disaster zones. When they go back and tell the horror stories, it is absolutely authentic, taken as, yes, he has suffered it, he has come back and told us this is what is happening over there. And these are the first ones who just reach about 8, 10, 20 kilometers away and go and tell them what all has happened. And thereafter, it is like a chain. By the time media comes and other things happen and official agencies start pulling in and all that, a lot of fire has already been spread. So this, it's very, very important for these eyewitnesses and affected population to be sensitized in times of our preparation. Another thing, how to convey these messages, or I would say bad news, to people when they meet or other things. But their, I would say, experiences are taken as 100% truth. Trust me, it is just like that. And no amount of official or any other agency coming and telling you, nobody believes. He says he's the man who has suffered, he's telling us the right thing. Of course, NGOs and civil society organizations play a very, very vital role. Most of them are non-profit organizations. They are very committed volunteers. They risk their lives sometime and help people. So they also become a very important source of dissemination of information, also to help those people who are affected in the disaster. Media, of course, a lot has been said, so I will not dwell too much on that. In the sense, I'll just cover in 2 other slides. In today's world, this is the most important tool what we have for information dissemination. And like previous speakers have mentioned, it's a social media which can play havoc with the information passage, because all kind of WhatsApp messages, clips, this, that, all those things will fly away, and that makes the job of the agencies extremely, extremely difficult. It's very, very difficult thereafter. Okay, sorry. Yeah. Now, whether we like it or not, the reality is disaster is a major news. And for news, I'm sure previous speakers will agree with me, dog biting a man is no news, but man biting a dog is the news. So unless it is sensationalized, unless it is put in a most, I would say, glaring manner, it's no news. And then politics gets in. Whether we like it or not, a lot of it gets built in, and the situation and the picture is distorted. We have seen it many, many times, the reality on ground and what is being passed on to that. And therefore, it becomes extremely, extremely important for us to be aware as to how to deal with this monster, media. And of course, it depends on us. How do we deal with them, what to do with them, how to pass those information and all that. But once again, coming back to this accuracy, transparent and truthful information is the key. Once you are saying that, then there is no fear. This will go down well with the audience. It will go down well with the agencies. It was mentioned in the passing that those who are dealing with disaster feel very, very frustrated, because civil agencies, disaster management agencies, government officials, they are neck deep busy with what is happening in the on ground. And on top of that, somebody is thrusting a mic on your face or a camera on your face. It is very, very annoying, but you cannot help it. It has to be managed. But it is for the media to also understand the circumstances under which these agencies are working and help them to do their job. And of course, do your job as well, whatever information you want to pass on. Yes, with relief workers, when they work, media is working with them, they can be an absolute force multiplier without any doubt. Somebody mentioned about the Srinagar floods. We have seen it. I mean, while the communications were totally destroyed, it was media with its satellite communications, all that was literally involved in connecting person to person, all the way from Srinagar to Kerala or Tamil Nadu and elsewhere. It was a great example of what media can do to help people who are affected by the disaster. Of course, there'll be heavy demand on communication, transportation, and other local resources. So many people will pour in over there. As it is, the system got disrupted, damaged. So this is added problem when you are trying to deal with media or when you are trying to manage this information dissemination. Well, this is self-explanatory that in order to make the news in the real sense news, there are situations, there are possibilities when the situation can be presented in a manner worse than what actually it is on ground. But this is the reality. But then what happens is there is always a, I would say, a way to deal with it, because if one media house is presenting it that way, somebody else will also give another picture. So likewise it goes. And of course, they are also very active and charged up. But as I said, the positive role should always be encouraged. Well, these are very basic things that they can be used to enhance public awareness about the preparedness measures. This is important because it is also a wake-up call for the government. When they go and inspect or other go and see those warehouses where the relief material and other things are there, and if it is inadequate or not being done properly, it all comes up. And therefore keeps government and agencies also on their toes because of the presence of media over there. It also helps like pouring, like people, those who are not there, but they want to help, donations and all that, it stimulates that, support is generated, and all kind of things, positive things can be done with this passage of information or dissemination of information of a disaster. However, the number of inquiries, what is happening, when is this going to happen, that is going to happen, also puts a little bit of strain on the agencies who are involved in disaster management. So the way to deal with it is that from time to time, you come out with your press statements or somebody to inform what exactly has happened. Last briefing was at so-and-so time. Next briefing is going to be at so-and-so time, so that you know there you are covering through and through. This is the second last point is a bit tricky, that sometimes it is not in national interest to demonstrate or to flash the news the way it should be. I don't know how far it will be successful, but sometime it has happened that media also it cooperated in managing the information. So the bad news is passed, but passed in a calibrated manner, because perhaps it is not in the national interest or something like that. And of course, it helps in enhancing your ability to deal with disaster. In addition to that, internet, or like what I said, that it's a very reliable source. It is also a repository of knowledge and very effective means of global communication. When we talk about globalized Earth now, so the kind of help which you require from other places can also pour in because of the internet availability, and people who are managing the disaster can make use of that. You can also resource from there what happened when similar disaster had taken place in so and so place, how was it managed, dealt, and it gives you a little bit of experience and understanding of that. Similarly is the disaster knowledge network, which is now in place. It's a very, very important tool to disseminate information, as also bring in cooperation from multiple agencies. This is also a very important tool which matches the specific needs with apt solutions in order to bring in that alignment from various agencies and other things. It is also capable of providing technical guidance to stakeholders and of course the beneficiaries. And as I said, that it is a national clearinghouse for information on natural disasters all the time. It promotes partnership between the government, public and private sectors. When they do that, it enhances our understanding, experience, and of course capacity to deal with disasters. Similarly, civil societies, that is civil CSOs, they are again very, very important instrument for dissemination of information. They have a lot of experience, and their cadres are also have dealt with disasters in many, many situations. So that's a great, great force multiplier. They help you identifying and prioritizing the areas in disaster management. And of course, that reduces the duplication and wastage of critical resources that are available to the state to deal with disasters. Communication avenues and hardware, those hardware and other things are also available with these setups. So the agencies who are dealing with disasters can bank upon them to augment their capacity to communicate in a better and in a much wider manner. So this hardware is also available with these organizations. Similarly, the NGOs, they play a very critical role in disaster and relief management because they work in tiers. There are local NGOs and there are global NGOs. There is also a linkage. So if you exactly know where these people are and what are they doing and how can they be of help, you actually reach out to much larger NGO community globally, which helps you in asking for and generating support and relief for the disaster affected areas. For country like India, which is becoming more and more strong with passage of years, perhaps those requirement may not be there, but many times as we are growing and enhancing our capacity, these things are still helpful. These are just given out the list of various CSOs and NGOs. If you have this with you, it is always a help that who to deal with what. I'll tell you a small example. What happens is, say there is an earthquake. Suddenly you find a lot of casualties. Women are there who have lost everyone, old women. Kids are there who have lost their parents. Now you do not know, like army or NDMA authorities and all that, what to do with this little kid. So these NGOs and other agencies that I was talking to you about, CSOs, if you have an understanding about their roles and their character, their work area, you can actually contact them and you can get people who are actually capable of looking after small kids, looking after widows, looking after women who have no other support system. So this is why it is important for those who are going to be in this field to understand the roles and the nature of work of all these CSOs and NGOs, so that you can actually tap the right resource to help you in mitigating the disaster effects. Well, local populations, as I said, they must be aware, because what happens when the disaster strikes, they are the victims. So those areas and other things have already been identified. Previous speakers have mentioned about that make them aware that these are the monsoon months, these are the problems that you may face. With satellite communication and other thing, those early warning systems, you can actually pre-warn the villagers and local people so that they move out from those areas. So all these things can happen in those areas which are prone to disaster. And of course, make them aware the risks that are in there, should they hang on to those areas beyond a particular, of course, they will not be allowed to, that's a different thing, but this is also a good information dissemination role of the state. And of course, availability of resources which are available locally, another thing, can also be tapped from the local population in local areas where the disaster may strike this way or that way sometime. With regard to what should be passed on, well, very basic, that one is about the warning. If you have the technical know-how and they are effective, they are functional, then it's a most important and a very, very good tool to warn the people about the impending disasters so that losses are minimized. Regional system of interconnected information center, it's basically, I'm talking about the setting up of network so that information is passed in a methodical manner, people are aware, and it is a synergical, I would say synergy is there in all the efforts with different organization or stakeholders are making. Accurate and timely information about the state of disaster. When I say state of disaster, is how is it affected and how is it panning out. This is again very important because people who are not yet affected with disaster, by the disaster, can be warned, can be cautioned. This is how it's going to help. And of course, great importance should be paid on relief and rehabilitation measures, because that brings in a lot of, when the anxious minds get rested, okay, something is on the way. Something is on the way, people get convinced, happy. I mean, I would say they are more convinced and they would like to fight it out rather than making a beeline for rear. Post-disaster initiatives are extremely important to bring back the normalcy, as also for future, learn your lessons, as I say. So these are the important contents when we must, as we go along. How do we do that? Again, very basic, face-to-face interaction, talk to people, various meetings, those small in local language, communicate through those presentations and all that. Door-to-door campaign, very, very important. Very, very important. Moment you go and knock at somebody's door and tell them 48 hours this is what is likely to happen, he'll be very happy to pack his baggage and move away from there. This is the most effective door-to-door campaign. Electronic media, I've already said, print media, wherever it is there, can always, local vernacular press and all that should be used. So these are the tools, and I'm sure all of you are aware of it. Now I'll come to my last slides. Important that how can we, that is military or National Disaster Management Authority, NDRF, it's a specialized force now, it's been created. They are gaining a lot of experience. So I think in another decade or so, there'll be hardly any area or place where NDRF will not be able to step in absolutely in time and mitigate the disaster effects. Army and paramilitary forces and others, they are a great asset for 2-3 reasons. One, their pan-India reach. There's not even one place you can see anywhere in India where you will not find a soldier or a paramilitary or a NDRF element. So they have a pan-India reach, particularly in remote areas. They have a very, very strong presence. So this must be tapped. NDRF and other specialized organizations, that is police, fire services, civil defense and all that, my experience tells me that they require greater integration. They all come with very good intentions, but the problem comes when each one of them are cocooned in their own functioning. So there is a lot of duplication of effort there is a lot of cross-purpose efforts. So there is a need for greater integration. And how do we build in? By carrying out mock drills, exercises, regular exercises and all that, so that those things are ironed out. I also feel with my experience, it is always good to nominate the lead agencies. It could be anyone, whosoever is there present on ground. So moment it is lead agency is nominated, then your channel of communication becomes very effective and it is very, very useful. This is how Army or perhaps NDRF can help. And this is where I would stop. There are a lot of things that we can share with my experiences, what we have done in the disaster management situations, but I leave it to for the question answer session if there is a requirement for that. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Lieutenant General VP Singh. I think this was completely a practicum oriented session where you explained the relevance of the topic through your experiences in such a rich field and sensitive also, and how NGOs do come into the picture, civil society organizations, and of course the entire paraphernalia of the defense services. So thank you so much, sir, for sharing your valuable experience, which has completely enriched this discussion. By now it's 12 minutes past 6 and we are at the end of, almost at the end of the session. Our three eminent speakers have spoken. Professor Jethwani, where she emphasized on the education part for media houses, as well as so many other things that ma'am highlighted, especially when she talked about the symbiotic relationship between media channels as well as the work that they do in disaster affected areas, which is a symbiotic relationship, she said, but yes, very difficult to carry on, as she elaborated, because media is usually not taken on board for disaster reduction, but only taken as a medium for communication, ma'am said. And also the whole, on the part of the media, the whole issue of how the total access to media is probably not even 10%, and yet all claim to be number one. So this, reportage that happens continuously, information being thrown at us, sometimes sensitivity is thrown out of the window, and sometimes very crass reporting happens. So maybe there is more schooling that is required there, but nonetheless, the importance of media in disaster affected areas cannot be taken lightly, because if we have a pool of scholars who augment their media knowledge, communication knowledge with the study of disaster that can be initiated in media schools, then the ability to cover the disasters will rise exponentially, and the entire framework for disaster management will be strengthened with that. So that is encapsulating very, very, in a very sketchy manner what Professor Jethwani said. She said so much, and it was absolutely thrilling to hear you, ma'am. Thank you so much. Dr. Haran, thank you so much, like I said, for explaining the administrative structure of the Disaster Management Authority and the wonderful simplicity with which you explained your three case studies, starting from the Mulla Periyar dam, as well as your ground level experience in dealing with sensitive issues such as that of the Atukala Pongala and the TVM International Airport, the sensitive handling of potential disasters, and to sort of preempt something that is likely to happen requires a lot of sensitivity as well as a sense of responsibility. And I'm glad that you shared your experiences, because a lot of times administrators take the flak of the aftermath of disasters, but we know that people like you and so many other able administrators are actually trying their best to mitigate disasters as well. Thank you so much for that, ma'am. And Lieutenant General Singh, I think you have recently encapsulated so well ground level issues that exist in disaster management, and how so many actors are there in the field, and what is the role of the defense that is played. With this, I leave the house open for discussion. The participants are free to unmute themselves. I think the platform allows for that, or they can type their questions in the chat box. We would love questions. We have a very eminent speaker list here. Please learn from them. Feel free to ask your questions. I leave the house open now. Thank you. No questions?
Let's invite him then. Is Dr. Ambrish Saxena there by any chance? Ambrish, are you there?
He's not there.
Okay. Okay. Anyone from DME, IP University? How would you like to take it forward, Sushmita, or somebody from there? Manasvi? If media guys don't speak, who will?
That's a surprise. I thought they'd speak nonstop sometimes. But you know, Jayashree, you said something, and I want Vinod and Gaurika to flag that. These 30 universities that have disaster management courses,
Yes.
I think we should target them.
Yes. In fact, I was
Really
telling
tough.
yesterday that we should first look at their syllabi. And because if you recall, Mr. Krishnan Watts said that, you know, there's no standardization, it's all riffraff. So the first thing probably NDRT could do, you know, in collaboration with one or two universities, to look at the course curricula and maybe set standards for that, you know. And also maybe one of the, at least some of the mass communication departments can seriously look at, you know, doing a course or a module on disaster communication. There are 300 universities that are teaching journalism and mass communication. I don't think anybody is teaching disaster communication per se, which is very important. If they don't learn at school, what do you expect of them when they become journalists? You know, so it's very important. They should take it seriously, and probably even one can think of going to UGC and also ICISR for doing some seminal studies in disaster research. There's no dearth of money. One has to really articulate and probably just put up the proposals.
Yeah,
Yes.
good idea.
Yeah. Okay,
Thank
I
you
was
so
telling about Nivedita, you had a wonderful, wonderful presentation. You put them in such a good light, information officers, maybe because, you know, a poor information officer, I always say, is sandwiched between a hard-nosed bureaucrat and often a flimsy politician. A hard-nosed bureaucrat knows, you know, they don't play with numbers. Once I recall, I have trained lots of information from almost all the states of India. So once, I'll not name the state, a state from northern India. So this information officer was explaining that he had taken a Politico for some, you know, sapling, you know, program, and about 1,000 saplings were supposed to be planted. So when he made a press release, went to the boss to show him, and he said, 1 lakh likho. He says, sir, but there are only 1,000. He said, baad mein bol dena, a typing error. Can you imagine? So he said, I didn't know what to do. A bureaucrat would never do, but a Politico might do. And we have many harrowing stories of sometimes the information officers not taken seriously. The research which I was talking to you about, which we conducted in 2018-10, was a USAID project. And we you know, went to almost 16 states, you know, to do this research. And generally the disdain of the information officers was, you know, two-pronged. One was that not people like you, but many, you know, young, you know, district collectors, or sometimes you find that in IAS, some of these IAS officers also become director of public relations in some states. So they think they know a lot about media per se. So these guys, information officers, at least at the central level, I know because I come from IMC, which is the Academy for Training Information Officers. So they understand the whole media, you know, landscape, how to write for the media, how to understand media. But then their general criticism was that the administrative officers don't take them seriously. Like you said, that they were special invitees. They should not be special invitees. They should be the ones who should be taking a call and advising the state governments on how to handle media. But they would know, because their entire, you know, education, their training is into media. So if they're only invitees generally don't speak. So they only take, and so they work as errand boys and girls. So this was the biggest problem they faced. And that was a time when social media was, coming up in 2008 and 10. And they really wanted to learn about the new, techniques of social media. At that time, they didn't know how to handle it. They totally seemed to be at sea. So I thought I'll share with you these couple of insights which we had from information officers.
Yeah. True. Actually, there also, Jayashree, I don't know, these trainings that are arranged for these information officers, I think that also needs a bit of a revisit.
Yes.
It's that age-old contents that are repeated again and again. So I think that can
and
also
also probably not only media on applied areas like disaster, climate change, they must learn that also. Gender, violence, a lot of things, geopolitical issues. If they don't understand the issue, how can they apply it in the communication? It works both ways.
True.
So who has the last word? What's the time like?
I think Saima wants to say
I want to
something.
say something.
Please say.
I just could not curtail my excitement. I wanted to tell that I worked in IMC for a year as an academic cum teaching associate, and I heard so much about Jethwani ma'am, so much. And I'm so lucky that finally I got to hear from her. And you've been a landmark over there, and I've been continuously hearing about you. So it was an indeed pleasure to have been in a session where you were talking and hear that session out.
I'm embarrassed.
Good. I'm so happy she's with us now.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Arjit. And we really like you, people like Saima and others, a lot of other faculty members, to maybe we can think about some joint research programs, since you guys have the manpower, the students. I know sometimes money is never an issue, one can always get for the research. So one should collaborate with these institutes and work on disaster research. That's what I feel.
Absolutely, ma'am. Absolutely.
So if there's nothing else, I'm sure there's a lot, in fact, but if there are no queries on that, then shall we call it a day, ma'am? Sir, with your permission?
Anything General would like to say? The last few words you Nivedita?
No. A lot has been said. So I think I'm really educated, and of course the dimensions that you covered and other panelists is fantastic, and felt very nice to be part of this very, very eminent panel. Thank you so much.
Request you to please share your PPT. I think it's very, very knowledgeable, very extensive, comprehensive. Really impressed, General, the kind of work you put in this PPT, which we can share with the participants. Really good.
Okay.
Really good.
I'll do that. I'll give it to Gaurika. I think you have got this now.
No, sir, you'll have to share it with me.
Okay, I'll do that.
Yeah,
I'll do that.
I'll share it with the participants. I think Madhav wants to say something.
Please do that.
Madhav, you would like to share something? Would you
No,
like
actually,
to say?
I am just traveling a bit, so that's why it's quite noisy. So that's the thing. I have to switch on the camera. Yeah.
All right.
You can even speak without the camera on. You can hear your audio if there's an issue. Madhav, you are DME, aren't you?
Yes, ma'am. Madhav sir is from DME. So am I. We are both assistant professors in DME right now. So Madhav sir must be reaching home. We in between while we are traveling, we join the session. I'm sure sir must be traveling.
Yeah. Is there anything you want to say, Madhav? Connectivity is such an issue, despite all the reasons.
Yeah, and he said, ma'am, that I think there's a lot of noise where he is.
Yes.
So we'll have to probably take his questions over email. Gaurika can coordinate that. With that, I think we come to an end of today's session. And I think it's been absolutely phenomenal, the kind of knowledge sharing that has happened. On behalf of the Institute of Social Sciences and the NAPSIPAG Disaster Research Group, I'd like to extend my thanks to the speakers of the day, Professor Jethwani, Dr. Haran, Lieutenant General Singh. Many, many thanks to you for joining with your insightful words, and to the participants without whom this session would not take place in the first, and to the organizers, Dr. Gaurika, Dr. Binod, and of course, the course conductor, the course coordinator, director, in fact, Professor Amita Singh. Thank you all so much, and good luck. And I hope
this will not be complete, Abha, unless we thank you immensely for
not at all.
last moment. Thank you so much for.
Thank you so much, Abha, ma'am, for being here.
Not at all, ma'am. I've
Yeah.
been with NAPSIPAG since I think when it started in JNU. So it's absolutely a pleasure. It takes me back to my old days. And of course, affiliations change, but the affection never changes.
Absolutely.
So thank you so much and have a great evening. Bye-bye. Namaskar.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.